Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel entitled The Stylist's Role in Sustainable Fashion. My name is Bxshxff, and it's my pleasure and honor to facilitate this panel of incredible image makers today. When it comes to sustainability, we often talk about the end and the beginning of the chain. We talk about the producer or the manufacturer or the designer, and we talk about the end consumer. But I don't belong on either side. I belong in the middle somewhere as a stylist. And we don't often talk about those roles that enforce and enable that chain. And so I'm really excited about the theme today because I think we have such an incredible responsibility as stylists. And I really look forward to hearing the points and opinions of these image makers that we have on the panel today. All right, so today we have with us Chloe, Eunice, and Tandekile. Unfortunately, Tobeka is unable to make it. She may be able to join us a little later, but sadly she's having technical difficulties, and I'll see if we can bring her in a little later. I'm going to hand over to each panelist now quickly, just to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get stuck into the meat of it all. Let's start with Chloe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Andrea Welgemoed. I'm a stylist, production designer, and fashion consultant. I'm in Paris at the moment, and I'm very excited to be talking a little bit about something that I feel is really, really important and should be spoken about more. So, hi.
Amazing. Thank you. Eunice?
Hi, everybody. My name is Eunice, and I am a photographer based in Portugal. I am the founder of Pais, Ethical Image Making, which is a photo production agency that focuses on social and environmental justice. We mainly work with ethical fashion brands. We also do artistic projects and big commissions. And I'm super excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tandekile?
Hi, everyone. I am Tandekile Mkize, and I am a fashion stylist, the junior fashion editor at Twyg, as well as the artistic director of Thug Alchemy, a fashion production house that's essentially a space for collaboration, exploration, and just experimentation. And yeah, just working across different mediums within that fashion production house.
Amazing. Thank you. All right, before we really get into the questions that I have for everyone, let me just also introduce myself a little, give you a little bit of a background about my history as a stylist. I started in African designer fashion. I worked at Cape Town and Joburg Fashion Week. That was the beginning of my career, and it really sparked a love of contemporary African clothing, designer clothing, that is. I worked there for a good few years before then being pulled into the fast fashion space for some time. I worked on the advertising team of one of the biggest South African fashion clothing companies, as well as a fashion director of an online magazine that was very focused on fast fashion. And I found myself really having a crisis of conscience with this shift from what I started in to what I was finding paid and what I was finding really people were supporting at that time. And I actually stepped away from styling. I stepped away from fashion. I almost thought about giving it up entirely until I encountered magazines like Twyg, which I was so thrilled to join the team. Magazines magazines that are having conversations about what we're talking about now, which is about how we can do things a little bit differently. I had this realization that we've kind of de-evolved from fashion to clothing. And what I mean by that is that when we say fashion, to me, that means something very holy and sacred. But the world has used that to kind of clothe the overconsumption, rather, of clothing. And that, for me, is what we have the biggest role and responsibility as stylists, is to show people that there is a fashion that can exist outside of overcompensation. So I'm very glad to be on this panel today with image makers who share a passion for creating a new way of doing things. I think, Chloe, let's start with you. Chloe, as she mentioned, she's joining from Paris. And you're frequently working with big brands. How do you feel about the responsibility that you're given to tell stories that are both good for brands in terms of sales, but also good for the planet and for people? And how do you balance this responsibility?
Yeah, it's such an important question. The first thing I think of is I was working with Dean from Simon & Mary some time ago on a campaign for their cowboy hats with Jana and Koos. And post launch, I asked Dean, how many hats did you sell from the campaign? And he said, 1. And I was shook. You know, we'd spent so much time on this incredible project, and you know, Dean's such an amazing creative, you know, a local milliner. I was really surprised. And then I realized, you know, I think people are just fighting for basic things like electricity and running water and supporting big retailers and fast fashion, like you said. So they're not supporting local. It's expensive, you know, so what do? We tap into niches, we build stronger consumer relationships, and find people that can afford and also believe in African fashion and its stories. I think the way that we're sustainable in it is we sort of help those people to buy less and choose well. I know Vivienne Westwood said that, and I have always resonated with it. You don't need, I think it's like in influencer culture, like you don't need to consistently keep posting these new looks all the time and keep showing people all these new things they can wear, but rather focus on people that are doing good things, that are making beautiful things, and show how to wear things in different ways, for example. I think it's difficult, and I think these challenges we face daily, because I feel like, especially in SA, you know, we're in a market that doesn't really welcome change so easily. So I think it's a big challenge, and yes, there's a lot of responsibility. I hope that answers your question. Carl, you're on mute. Thanks, Kai.
That's terribly embarrassing. I'm sorry. I was saying, you've touched on something really important around this idea in modern times that we need to wear something new every time. Every time we're seen, every time we're photographed, every time we go out, we need to wear something new, as if we're all mini celebrities. And I think stylists have had a real hand in that. You know, stylists themselves, for example, I would love to see a stylist repeating a look at Fashion Week on street style images, for example. I think that would be so powerful around this idea of what we've bought, let's love, let's treasure, let's wear it to death, then let's repair it, wear it to death again, and pass it on somehow, you know? And I think it's really, you've touched on a really interesting point. I don't know, Tandekile, if you had any thoughts on how you balance the responsibility between wanting to push people's sales, because at the end of the day, that's what our job is. It's a job. A stylist has a job. And with wanting to promote the good for the planet and the people and people. Tandekile?
Yes, no, it is like a bit of a tricky one, especially like you were saying earlier about how it's like, you know, working to make like a living, and then it's also just like actually sticking to like your values and, you know, your core beliefs. So it's a bit tricky, because it's also like something where I'm just like, I work like in the commercial space, and so like working in the commercial space, like clients are very like demanding in terms of like what the expectations are, and their demands and the budget doesn't necessarily always like, you know, match up. So it's not like I can just like work on getting like a full wardrobe of like organic fibers, or just any like high quality like materials that we could, sustainable materials that we can necessarily work with. So it's usually like you turn to like fast fashion places to shop. So it's also something that I'm also just trying to navigate and figure out, that how then when I enter into the commercial space, do I still maintain, you know, a sustainable approach in terms of the wardrobe that I would use.
Yeah, it's a real struggle. You know, I think as stylists, as image makers, the need to compromise is often forced upon us by budgets, by corporate, and it's up to us to find a way to resist that compromise, or compromise in the least impactful areas. So it's definitely.
Sorry about that. But what's great is that there's so many places where you could hire like wardrobe from. So that's definitely like helpful in terms of ensuring that I don't necessarily go to the fast fashion route and go into a mall, whereas there's all of these clothes that have been around for quite some time, and a lot of them are still like in great quality, in great condition. So I think that's like where I find a much more sustainable approach in terms of acquiring wardrobe.
Can I add to this super quick?
Please.
So I work with Nola Williams, who owns Stylist Own, and she's created an initiative that is so incredible. So basically there's a designer room apart from, because I've got rail space there where I hire out my clothes, and most of my jobs I literally source from the hire houses, because exactly like you said, it's more sustainable. I don't want to keep going to Zara and keep buying things on repeat, and then literally they go to the production houses and they're wasteful. So I rent every last thing I can, unless it's obviously specific and needs to be made up. But there's this designer room that Nola's created, which literally houses super young streetwear designers, anyone that is young. They bring their samples in and they rent it to stylists. I mean, one designer's suit made so much money that he was able to build his collection again from scratch when he didn't have cash. So it's an initiative that is consistently helping young designers. It's going online very soon, so it will be accessible nationally. But it really is amazing. And I think these kind of things are, and these kind of initiatives really are the step forward for us in supporting local talent, supporting smaller up and coming businesses and brands, you know, because often we can't afford to support local designers because it's expensive. The manufacturing is expensive, but at least we can help here and there. You know what I mean? And this initiative kind of does that.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think initiatives like that were born of the terrible piles and heaps that stylists were creating by just buying and ignoring afterwards. And I think that it's up to us all to really support these initiatives to change those ways of working. Eunice, I want to move to you, and I want to also ask you about how you deal with clients who are primarily focused on sales and might feel that this need for focusing on people and planet is a distraction to that. But before you jump into that, I'd like to give you an opportunity to just introduce what it is you do at the agency, and give us a little insight into the work you do.
Okay, so as I said, I found an agency called Pais, Ethical Image Making, which is a photo production agency, and we focus on environmental practices and social practices. So we kind of look at, especially fashion photography, as so adjacent to fashion as sort of a mirror of exploitative and extractive practices. So every time that we go into production, we have that in mind, that there is inequity because we're so adjacent to each other. So we try to stave off of that, and we create protocols that are environmentally sound and socially sound. So we work closely with the community. We ask what it looks like for them to work with dignity, to, you know, co-create with us in a way that they're not only are they proud, but they feel like they are acknowledged and participative in the futures that they want. And we look at the environment and how to reduce waste as much as we possibly can by repurposing, reutilizing, and using what we are, creativity, as the core of our practice and the dynamics of our ecosystems. So that's pretty much what I do in a very abstract level. In a more practical sense, when I decided to start the company, it was very clear that ethical fashion brands have paved the way for these conversations to happen. from designers who care for their supply chain, from designers who are super mindful of what kinds of collections they're making and the number of pieces that they're putting out in the world for consumers to buy. So I wanted to understand what their practice is and what is a supply chain and what a supply chain looks like in fashion and how can I mirror that in an ethical way in photography. So in that sense, all the brands, most brands that we work with are very, their value system is very similar to the company. So it hasn't been the case where obviously everybody has to sell, they have to sell, I have to sell my services, they sell their products. But we're acutely aware that that need should never trump the need of caring for people, the need for bringing more equity and opportunities, the need of communicating what it is that we do so that the consumer is aware that they're not buying, they're investing. And in that sense, organically, we kind of create a way, a sort of a flow that by the time that a consumer sees an image or wants to buy the product or has that desire, they kind of know, or at least they have in their thought that it was something that was ethically created to the best of everybody's ability. So that's pretty much
fantastic. I think what you touched on is really around aligning with other people who share your values. You know, often in a professional setting, we just accept that perhaps people have other values, even if they are problematic, but let's just get our paycheck and move on. And I don't think we live in a climate that we can allow that to happen anymore. Yes, we all have bills to pay, but it is so crucial to align with people who share your values so you don't have those struggles day to day. Another thing I really loved that you said was using creativity to solve these problems. You know, we are creatives. We should get excited about the gaps in the chain that we can have the opportunity to fill, because we have creative minds and we have an opportunity to apply that to working out new ways of doing things. You know, I love that saying that says wasted is a design flaw. As creatives, we should never tolerate a design flaw. We should be enthusiastic about fixing it. Quickly, you also mentioned that you are developing protocols, and I know that when you and I chatted previously, you said that you were busy developing case studies, working with clients to show that this can work. It can be done. It's not a pie in the sky. Oh, we wish that there was a new way of doing things. There should be, there is, and it can work. Can you talk to me a little bit about some success stories you've had there, and also about the protocol you're developing?
Yes, so let's just say a client or a brand reaches out to us and wants to work with us, and they have obviously their own vision and their their own objectives. From the beginning, we try to understand what's available to us in wherever we're going to work, whether it's a big city or a smaller town, and who are the people that we sort of want to co-create with. So I start jotting down, like, for example, foods, catering, transportation, radius, who's going to travel, who's not going to travel, how can we minimize that? Even with designers, we talk about packaging, not sending too many clothes, or like over pulling is such a big problem where sometimes designers just send everything and then all the accessories, but that's packaging, that's waste, that's shipping, and sometimes it's unnecessary. So we sort of curate with the designer. We also go to creators that we want to support, and we start co-creating a production that everybody is comfortable with. So I spoke about food, packaging, traveling. So for example, for every production, there's a limit of radius that we hire. So I wouldn't, for example, if I'm in Porto, I wouldn't necessarily hire a creative from the Algarve, which is like 500 kilometers away from here. I limit that to 200 kilometers, because I know that people can commute those distances, therefore it's less wasteful, and it's creating opportunities for people in a more localized manner. When it comes to catering, we talk to the local restaurants. We're very mindful of types of food and the way that, you know, certain things are prepared as well. And equipment as well. So if I'm, you know, working with videographers or other photographers, I'm very clear about the amount of equipment that is necessary for a production. If it's a set designer, also we sort of jot down what kinds of things that we're going to use. What can be repurposed in future productions, so we avoid trying to create something new. Or single use. So we're always thinking about ways of, okay, if we need to do this now, how many times can we use it afterwards and in which ways? And can we lend it to someone? Can we borrow from someone? And that's all part of the environmental stance that we take when it comes to social and social bringing the social equity and social awareness into our productions. Again, it's pinpointing the communities that are mostly marginalized, understanding the narratives that we are trying to convey visually, and making sure that's not either appropriation, extraction, misinterpretation. And if there's any aspect of the narrative that I myself either have a bias or don't understand, it's hiring someone who can then create checks and balances. And in that sense, our image, at the end of the day, photography is such a facade. You look at an image and you, as a consumer, a visual consumer, you make your own story in your mind about how that image came about. So Pais is more about making sure that the production, the behind the camera, is equitable and environmentally sound. So we sort of move out of the extractive processes and move into more regenerative ones, and quite frankly, happier ones.
I think I love how you say to make sure that what's behind the camera it really stands up, you know, and I think that we've had this culture of, as image makers, of whatever happens behind the camera, no one needs to know about. And a culture like that can create injustice or at least perpetuate it. So I think being utmostly transparent about our processes and how we achieve them is so crucial. And I think this protocol that you're developing is really going to be such a helpful tool for stylists, particularly stylists of the future, to start this way. You know, they always say it's tougher when you're older, but I think COVID showed us that we can make changes like this. You know, if we need to, we can make changes like this, and we did. So the concerns around sustainability, the threats, are equally as urgent. So let us make equal and urgent changes. I know you mentioned that obviously this is something you're still developing, but am I right that you will one day share this with the industry at large?
Yes, for sure. I think it's really important to not live in a bubble. And I understand that if I just surround myself with people in the ethical fashion space, it happens, you know, it happens naturally. We sort of distance ourselves from everything that is happening, but the truth of the matter is that we need to work together. So when people like Chloe, who probably work with bigger companies and bigger productions, come to us, or we know each other, we can synergize, and, you know, eventually, hopefully, you know, these protocols will stand on their own, to the point that I can just say, hey, Chloe, here's like a case study that might be helpful for your next production. And maybe, you know, Chloe can shoot some holes in whatever theories or whatever productions we're creating, because it's also about scale and replicability. And, you know, when it comes to understanding sustainability, we need to understand how often something can be replicated, whether it needs to be scaled back or scaled up. So I think it's important to create those bridges. And this is why we are going to put, you know, our work out there once it's solid enough.
And you're touching on another aspect of sustainability I don't think we talk about, which is really around being as open sourced with life-changing and helpful information, instead of holding it, keeping those cards to our chest and not allowing others to enter that conversation. So I'm really looking forward to that protocol, and I've learned so much from what you've just said to us now. Tandekile, I want to come back to you. So you've mentioned a lot around your commercial work, but you also do a lot of editorial, particularly for us at Twyg. And you also often create green fashion narratives. What decisions do you make to make sure that the fashion you're working with is, this broad word, sustainable? And what resources do you use to achieve that?
Okay, so firstly, when I started out like working on editorials, it was always like a situation of trying to find, you know, garments that are gonna like last a long time. So focusing on longevity of like the material, and yeah, just focusing on like trying to source more natural fibers. But that's usually like within like the luxury sector of things. And what I'm finding, Jackie had shared an article with me called "What is to be Sustained" by a fashion practitioner, Otto van Bush, who is a lecturer at the Parsons School of Design. And essentially, like, when I read it, it felt like this huge indictment on like everything that like I've been trying to do like and want to do like in the luxury sector, because with that question that he poses, what is to be sustained, if we look at like luxury fashion and like discourses around like sustainability with it, like it usually like points the finger at like the lower rungs of society. So when we think about fast fashion, it's like, who is able to afford fast fashion? And that's not people that would have the money to like, you know, buy a like Tebe Magugu like knitted like dress or anything like that. So when you think about that, it's like, are we then perpetuating these are we perpetuating these ideas that just further like, you know, cause like a divide and like not think about like, you know, people on like, you know, just the lower ends of society. So yeah, with luxury fashion, the focus is definitely just on the people that can afford and people, and it's not necessarily on like the have-nots. So that made me like feel like, wow, am I like, you know, perpetuating this now like through my work? And so I just had to like sort of like take a step back, and we were talking with Jackie, and I was just like, and she was just like, she doesn't know why she's in fashion and stuff. But then it's like, we need that those just those reminders to remind us that at the end of the day, like we need to find solutions that are gonna help us like democratize just the system in general, and like make it a much more inclusive space and inclusive conversation where it's where people who can't afford those luxury pieces do have do have like, you know, sustainable practices and approaches that are accessible to them as well. So with that in mind, I've just been sort of like just thinking about how we then going to boost those like democratic principles and the sustainable principles that the industry suggests that it wants. And so I believe that also as image makers, like it's our responsibility to like, you know, share like different narratives and different like design approaches that support, you know, a sustainability. So I've just been looking at just in South Africa, there's so many like amazing examples of designers in general that like employ sustainable practices, such as upcycling, and such as creating garments that are like multi-wearable. And so like there are those sort of like initiatives and approaches that we could like possibly like take in order to, you know, make it much more like an even playing field and open for like everyone. So that's what I'm trying to explore in like my work like right now. Not that like I'm trying to like divert from the luxury aspect of it, because I do think that within luxury as well, like there've been such great examples of like how we can go beyond just thinking about, you know, high quality garments and longevity. But I love what Gabriella Hurst does and what she's doing at Chloe as well. Like for the first show at Chloe, her first show at Chloe, she found a bunch of bags, old Chloe bags from eBay, and upcycled those. So I love that it's people are finding ways to create like a circular like model within, you know, their brands and businesses. But in terms of, what was the last bit of your question?
Just what decisions you make around ensuring that fashion is sustainable, and what are the resources you use?
Yes, so the resources that I use, I am like quite the reader. So, and also like I've been enjoying, during the lockdown specifically, watching Tim Takes by Tim Blanks on BOF Live. So programs like that and platforms like that like offer like so much information.
Absolutely. I think you've touched on the importance of being permanently self-critical of your way of thinking and your way of doing. If you are not self-critical, you just frankly don't really belong in a space that impacts the way people see realities. It is your responsibility, it is your duty to do that. And the other thing that is crucial, absolutely crucial, that you've spoken about is these conversations so easily become elitist. And it is so important that we find ways of making sure that clothing, because ultimately clothing is a right, it is a need. And how can we ensure that everyone can access that right in an ethical and sustainable way? And then how do we make sure that the luxury aspiration is also shares those same values?
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to also just go back to what you were saying earlier as well about how fashion has has sort of like become like soulless in a sense, where it's just about like consumption and, you know, having more, and fashion essentially losing its soul. And I do think that if we start looking at clothes as like as beyond like inanimate products, like we're able to like, you know, feel that soul of clothes and also respect them like more as well. So when we do have like respect for them more, we want to, you know, keep them and you know, cherish them and pass them down. So I think like when and also what's great living in a country like South Africa and like just the fashion landscape here, it's just like so rich with like these beautiful stories of like our cultural history and heritage, that there is like a soul that's in there, you know?
Absolutely. And that is fashion's job, really. I want to bring the conversation back to Chloe. Tandekile ended talking about cultural narratives, and this is something you've really worked with a lot. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Tebe Magugu Heritage Dress Collection, which was recently released, changing the world one dress at a time. And the power of these images is that you've taken local South African cultural stories to the world. What did it take to understand what would ignite international interest while still being locally relevant and sensitive? And how do you make sure that the same comes across through all your projects, really balancing something that connects globally, but still is meaningful and respectful of what's going on locally?
I think the most important thing, and I cannot stress this enough to anybody who is an image maker, is research. You have to do your research. It's important to spend time understanding what you're creating. And I think everything Eunice said about sort of ethical systems being put in place is just so inspiring. I'm so inspired by everything you said. And I think that that's just another part of this bigger puzzle. I think because the work that's coming out of Africa right now is a continued search for identity, people seem to kind of generalize the aesthetic of an entire continent, and it's not possible. It's just too diverse. So there is so much research to be done. There is so much work to uncover young brands who have stories to tell, who just need an image maker that can see them and help them and build something really beautiful that can connect with not just people from here, but people from all over the world. I think finding beauty in the banal, these sort of everyday things that become important to us. It can be something like, literally on my website, I have a vase with these plastic flowers in it. And the reason I do is because in like a household in Soweto, or even to my gran many years ago, a vase like that, you know, especially if you couldn't afford a really nice vase, was a symbol of pride. You know, maybe you couldn't afford fresh flowers all the time, and you had plastic flowers with those water droplets on them, but there was a sense of beauty and pride in that. And I know that the plastic flowers are not very sustainable, but the idea is beautiful, that somebody had that much pride in their home. You know, I think also the other thing I want to say that's quite important is I think as South Africans, we don't realize how many people see us, you know, and I think we often lessen ourselves. You know, I've noticed this with a lot of fellow creatives that I work with, but I feel now more than ever, the world is such an exciting place where the old guards have made way for the new and younger people who are controlling the narratives and the spaces, which is why we can have conversations about what is an ethical set? What does it look like to localize content and come to a place and hire people, hire creatives that know what they're doing, you know, that can speak a language, that can understand the culture. I think these things are so important because not everybody can do everything, you know. This is how we work together. This is how stories are true and real and honest. You know, I think all we have to do is continue to dream and put in the work. And I think that right now we need more resources than ever. I think we have so much creativity. And I think talks like this are just so inspiring for so many people because I think we have so much else going on right now in terms of just trying to be seen and trying to get people to buy into South African brands, which is difficult enough with the market that we have here. You know, we don't have the markets Europe and America and China has, you know, we don't have that kind of support. So I think these conversations are even difficult to have because it feels so far away, you know, but everything Eunice says makes things feel more achievable to me. It's like you can start small, you can, you know, you can have dreams and follow these things. So yeah, I've just loved this conversation. I hope I answered your question. I'll just talk quickly about the campaign with Tebe. I think the most moving and important part of that campaign for me was what we're trying to do at the moment, especially with Tebe's brand, and this is part of my fashion consulting side, is you know, he's an incredible storyteller, and I think we're trying to find our own space and our own identity in his world. You know, what if like we just did with AZ Factory, what if Africa was the birthplace of couture? What if we could create surrealist narratives and kind of play in a world that doesn't even exist, you know? I think there are no boundaries. And I think the most important thing for me is that whatever I do, it's somehow educational or creates conversations around stories, around people's culture, around people's designs. I think those things are important. I think that's also, you know, something to do with being ethical is it's not just clothing. Like this is somebody's entire world. You know, this could mean something to own one of these pieces. And just to go into luxury fashion that we were speaking about now, I feel like the work at hand is to sort of teach people how to shop. Because if you go to an atelier where people have spent time learning and crafting and sourcing amazing fabrics that are sustainable, you should pay for that piece. And you shouldn't go to H&M. Sorry to name and shame H&M. I mean, they're one of the most sustainable brands. Let's go for Zara maybe. SARS. Like you shouldn't just go to a big retailer like that and just, you know, spend over the next 6 months, let's call it like 15,000 Rand. You could use that 15,000 Rand to buy one incredible piece that will most probably outlive you. There are hype brands all around us. But I think if you buy less, choose well, and we teach people that, you know, what does this piece mean? What is the cultural relevance to this piece? Is this an important piece? What does it mean to the designer? Do I believe in the designer's story? I think that's how we make the big changes.
Absolutely, and it comes back to that thing I mentioned earlier around overconsumption. Keep saying that word wrong, and this idea that we are entitled to many outfit changes. You know, it is far. I think someone is far more stylish if they, as you said, saved that money, didn't buy one thing a month. They saved it. They got one coat that year, and they wear it every single day for the rest of the year. I will respect their style far more than someone I see dripping in something new every day. And I think what you said, buy less, choose better, really comes down to the essence of our responsibility as stylists. Unless that is not at the core of every conversation we're having, we are holding on to the old ways of doing things. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, what I really loved, is that phrase you said you use in your process with Tebe. What if? You know, Atipatra Ruga says he's a myth maker, and I love that. Doesn't refer to as an artist, but a myth maker. And when I spoke to the artists, they said that it was around reimagining African mythologies. And I think sometimes the work that you do with Tebe lives in that world, because African mythologies have either been lost, bastardized. There are many other words I can use, but none of them are good. This question, what if, is really inspiring me. And I think it is our job to also reimagine the Africa that was and that will be. So thank you for sharing that. Eunice, I just want to pop back to you. My question is, on a more granular level, how do the images that you create differ from the ones that aren't addressing systemic inequalities and the climate crisis?
I think it's the processes. I mean, as I said, an image is so deceptive. And it's not, at least on this side, we want, as a creative person, I want people to imagine as well when they see something, and by no means to limit that, and to limit that the possibilities of the stimuli that an image, a beautiful image or an image can create. But the process in which is created is something that we need to start talking about. Extraction is real at every single level of a production, because we don't even think about these things. We look at clothes as things, and we forget that there are bodies creating these clothes. There are minds that spend hours weaving that fabric that we're going to use for a photo shoot, and then send it back to the designer, and then the designer hopes to sell it. These are people we're talking about. When we talk about communities, we're talking about people, my mother, my grandmother, my kids, their kids. It's a whole lineage that we need to consider when creating something. So when we talk community, co-creation, collaboration, we should also reel in the fact that we are our own agents. We're all designing systems, whether it's our routines, everyday routines, is it our work, whatever. We have that agency. So the question is, what am I doing to dismantle my own biases, to bring more equity to my own processes, and to participate in a community that, beyond envisioning, is already here, because we're all here now.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. And I think, you spoke about, for example, how people don't connect with the hands that wove a fabric that ends up on a shoot, that ends up in an image. And, I think the disservice that the Industrial Revolution, one of the many disservices, was it hid away the hands and then mechanized them. And it divorced that beautiful magic that comes from hands making something for you. Many generations ago, you would wear that coat forever because you knew that the wool was grown just up the road. It was processed and created for you by someone you probably knew. You know, it had a little bit of magic imbued in it. And I think that also is so important for us to really shine the light on. You know, sometimes images can be a 2D representation of things, but conversations and processes and the way we release things are how we ensure that the 3D environment around it really lives up to the beauty we're trying to create.
Yes, and you said that you mentioned about being an open source process, and I think that's so important, especially amongst photographers and other creatives that work in fashion, for us to have these conversations. And you know, we all make mistakes, and I, for one, am grappling with the fact at the moment that my studio is not the most accessible for people who are not able-bodied. And so now I have to iterate and rethink my practice in that stance. And it's, you know, accountability is super important. We do have these biases. We sometimes don't think about inequity is by design, but we also can change that. Okay, yeah.
I really, really appreciate your openness to talk about the fact that you have biases, because I think the idea that we need to shame ourselves for having them is the problem. We shame ourselves for keeping them, but not for having them. And by critically always thinking about saying, I do have a bias. It's not a question of if, it's a question of where they are and how can I identify them. We have about 15 minutes left. So before I move to a few questions that have come through, and I'd invite everyone else to send through any questions you might have. I just wanted to offer all three of you a moment to close if there was anything else you felt like you wanted to address, or should I jump into questions?
I think you can jump into questions from my side.
Okay, cool. Let me just have a look at them. So there's a question, I'm just going from the top. So there's a question from Buck, and it's an interesting one. Buck is interested in the sustainability of a stylist's livelihood. I find that styling is a very erratic industry. How do we sustain our profession in a particularly employment vulnerable context? Is there anyone who wants to answer? Because it's a real concern we all face, let's be honest.
I can answer it. I'm happy to answer it. To be honest, I think being any creative in this environment, and you know, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I really believe this. I don't think that you can put all of your eggs in one basket. I definitely think you need to master something, but I think that you need to have many things going on for yourself. You know, I have a lot of different small businesses that kind of bring in a little bit of money here and there. It may not be much in one, it may be a lot in another. But that really is how I sustain myself, because it's erratic, because literally it's even ageist and sexist and a bit homophobic and not sustainable. There's so many bad things I can say about this industry and how advertising runs and how people are treated and how the hierarchies pull you down. It is erratic. So always have something else that you're doing. You know what I mean? And it can be something small, like you could, you know, Johannesburg is rife with, and Cape Town, I know, with amazing thrift culture. You know, the containers come down from Mozambique. It's quite hectic, but people find amazing ways of recycling and reusing that clothing. So you could start a small little boutique for that. You know, there are a lot of, I mean, people make income off TikTok and things. So I just think never put your eggs in one basket. And also build a very strong point of view, because if people can really see who you are, you'll stand out from many other people, and you won't just be a number. And I don't think you ever want to be. I think you want people to understand who you are. And if you can do that, I think that you will have a much more sustainable and full job that possibly isn't as ageist, or you know, or affects you in those ways.
Absolutely. I think those 2 points are a real masterclass in making styling a sustainable career. So thank you for that.
No, I totally agree. I don't think, like, I think also, like, for myself personally, also because I'm relatively like new in the commercial space. I started in the commercial space, but I had like a 9-to-5 sort of situation that I was also working at as well. So it's really important to, like Chloe said, not put your eggs like in one basket, because yeah, things can turn up and turn down.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the other thing is really also just ask yourself if this is the job that you want it to be, and try and to get experience to see if it's the job you think it is, because there's an idea of what a stylist does that people have, and they get into it and then it doesn't meet their expectations and then they feel really disappointed. Another thing you mentioned, Tandekile, was starting out. And I think one of the participants here, Saviwe, mentioned about how South Africa can be really insular as a culture. We try to, whatever we've got, whether it be IP, whether it be a job, we try and hold on to it ourselves. Sure, it's because there's so little to go around, but I think we've created a culture where it's really hard to enter this industry. You know, for example, unpaid interns is a big thing. I still see this issue on employment requests, must have own car. I think things like that are so, they exclude people from being able to get into and getting the work experience. So I think it's also our job as experienced stylists to open up opportunities for others to create careers here. There's another question here from Antonia, and I think we'll probably close with this question. It says, what more can we do to shift the narrative towards this very important concept that we've been talking about, buy less, choose better, in the face of so much pressure to be always dressed in new trends? And I think that's interesting because there's always a new trend. There's always a reason to buy something new. I don't know, Chloe, if you'd like to speak on that.
Sorry, I just saw the next question and I was like, oh, that's really nice. I think, sorry, I got so distracted there. Yeah, you go.
Since I'm not a stylist, I'll just offer my 2 cents from yes. I think I remember when I was a kid, and there was this summer that I got really sick, so I had to stay home. It was a bummer. Not that this is important, but and I remember watching fashion TV, and there was this time where it was ready to wear and then haute couture. And I remember seeing Karl Lagerfeld giving an interview for that week and other designers. And I remember seeing the gowns. And I thought to myself, it's what I would love to save money to buy that. And I would wear it forever. And I think the shift, as you said, we're in such a fast-paced, fast-consuming times. But there's something so beautiful about protecting the craft and the art that is cloth making, that in on itself should be reason enough for us to want to invest and want to buy one of a kind type of clothing and have it in our wardrobe. And every time that we open it, see it, and remind ourselves that it's a designer that's being respected because they were paid what they're worth, is the seamstress that is being paid what they deserve. It's you know, people who made those clothes who we are investing in, and we're also investing in art, in a craft. And yeah, in craftsmanship. And I think, to me, as also a consumer, it becomes more important, that story that not only I tell to myself, but share with others, than a trend that nobody will remember in 3 years.
Absolutely. And that word trend, if I can offer my 2 cents, I always find that when people find out that I'm a stylist and they've just met me, the first question they ask is, well, can you go shopping with me? And then the second question they ask is, so what's in, what's out? What are the latest trends?
Yeah.
It is the most infuriating
I
question.
love it.
And I'll tell you why. The word trend was conceived in some corporate boardroom to sell more clothes. If you feel pressured by this word trend, you should assess your boundaries, because it is really just trying to enforce a cycle. First of all, it was spring, summer, winter, autumn. Then we started adding new cycle. Now there's a new trend every week. Literally, fast fashion companies release based on trend boards weekly. How can we keep up with that? Should we? No. So I want to, how can we keep up with trends? By remembering that the trend is your story. I want to know, what is your story? That's all I care about. I'm not interested if you're wearing the latest fashion. I want to know what your story is. So if that's what you can focus on instead of focusing on trends, I think you will find yourself naturally buying less and choosing better. Chloe, I know you were intrigued by this last question, so let's close with it and I'll ask you to answer it and then we'll wrap up. As a stylist, this is also from Buck. As a stylist, I've found that the images I've produced using local designers' garments have done little to develop the brands or done little to bring profit to that designer. Is it a stylist's responsibility to facilitate profit for designers?
It's such an important question. You know, I think that things are not as black and white as that question. I think honestly, there are so many moving parts in a brand, and having and being a designer and being a stylist. I think that the brand needs to be a brand that has a strong point of view, a strong identity. If you're working with a brand that doesn't have any of those things and you're promoting them, you're already starting off on a bad foot. So it needs to be somebody that, you know, has great manufacturing. There's a lot of things I can talk about to this. I'm just saying there are a lot of moving parts. You can help someone. I mean, for example, I was working with Bonang Mateba. I found a really amazing designer from Cosmo City. He was incredible. He wasn't that well known at the time. I put one of his jumpsuits on Bonang Mateba and he sold like 10 in a week. And that really helped his business and kind of got him better known, you know. And that was one small thing that I could do by putting him on the right person. But it is so circumstantial. So I think you'll find, like I mentioned earlier, I did that campaign for Simon and Mary, and it was actually too creative for people to conceptualize. And we sold one cowboy hat. So you're never going to win every battle. You also need to find designers that are pushing themselves and growing and putting themselves on the right platforms to sell, and getting involved in the, you know, with the right kind of PR strategies and marketing. So you are a big part of that, but you cannot be responsible for every single piece of that puzzle. And I think that's my message.
Yeah, I think also like when I'm not like a marketer, like I'm not like, you know, in sales necessarily. I don't necessarily go into styling because I'm trying to, you know, sell things out necessarily. I mean, yes, it's the goal, like, you know, to make profit, but I think that it's important for us to, you know, ensure that we are sharing like the story of the brand more than anything, like in the most authentic way. So when I come to approach working with the brand, it's not necessarily because I'm trying to push sales and, you know, trying to like, you know, do that, but more like, you know, share their story.
Yeah. Yes. Push sales, stories, push sales.
At the
all right.
I would also say, if you have time, just quickly. Also, when you are talking with your team in a production, also share the brand story. I think oftentimes, you know, a makeup artist doesn't know which brands they're working with. Sometimes a set designer doesn't know what kind of work, which brand they're working with. And sometimes even those conversations will generate more awareness of what brands are doing what and how. And that word of mouth is also important. And for other image makers also, if you have the possibility to get acquaintance also the processes of the brand, and then maybe write a little bit on your portfolio website what kind of brand it is, or you know what they do. I think it's also important because these are people, you know, we should rally and elevate each other as well. So try to understand each other's needs more than just a sales pitch or whatever commercial need. It's also supporting the community that supports us and vice versa, and creating circular wealth as well. I would say that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'd just like to thank all three of our panelists. I think this has been a really inspiring and informative panel. I know I feel inspired, and I know I've learned a lot. So I hope that all of the participants who've joined us have also taken something from this, and that you can go on as ambassadors for sustainability in fashion, as we will all move on to endeavor to be.